Hello and welcome to a special legacy show. My name is Mike Robinson. 1975 started his career as a coach in upstate New York at 23 years old. In 2017, retired from Bedford High School, Bedford, New Hampshire, as one of the most respected high school administrators in the country. 42 years of coaching, mentoring, and administration. Bill Whitmore can best be described as a motivated, organized, and a stickler for the rules. Not to mention one of the best, if not the best dressed administrator in the history of athletic directors. At a recent testimonial dinner, one of his colleagues described Bill saying, "I've never seen him dressed twice in the same ensemble of shirt, slacks, or coat. He's a sharp person." One of Bill Whitmore's famous quotes, "When you wake up each morning, you are either a gazelle or a lion. You better be running." Welcome, Bill Whitmore.
Thanks, Mike.
Good to have you.
Great to be here.
Bill, give us your full name and where do you live?
Full name, formal name is William L. Whitmore, Jr. and live in Concord, New Hampshire.
And how old are you?
64, will be 65 July 22nd.
Where were you born?
Long Branch, New Jersey.
What did your dad and mom do for a living?
Those are my heroes. My dad was in the service. He was in the Army for 12 years, was a military police. And then the story that he tells me is that he really wanted to be a lifer, but my mother nagged him so much to get out and have a different kind of life that he did that. And he was a barber. Barber, and my dad and mom were special to me. My mom was a seamstress. She sewed coats for a living. My dad got an 8th grade education. My mom had a 5th grade education. So there were no college graduates in my family till I came along. My mom raised basically 5 brothers and a sister at the age of 13 when her mother died, and went to work in a sweatshop. And I have more admiration for the work ethic. If I have any ethic at all about working, it's from my mom.
Yeah, it's a great story. Good story. What's your earliest childhood memory?
I remember a picture that I was dressed up in a bow tie. I had a fedora hat, an overcoat in the front of my house in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. And I just remember that picture as always liking fashion, liking clothes, and just being dressed appropriately. But that's the first thing I remember about myself from the photos I've seen in my recollection. And I think we were probably going to Easter Mass that Sunday.
Yeah. Favorite childhood memory?
We got a lot of those. But I think any time that we spent doing things as a family was special. Being with my grandparents from Italy, my father's side to Virginia. I always enjoyed a trip that we took every year to Crewe, Virginia, where my dad was from. He's a Southern young man. And my grandfather and my uncles all worked on the railroad. They were engineers, not the kind of engineers that work in chemical or electrical. They drove the trains. So I remember vividly my 2 sisters and I and my parents, and the only vacation we took was getting in the car at Easter, driving to Crewe, Virginia, and spending time with my grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. That was always special for me.
Nice. And what was it like growing up in Long Branch as a kid? Like, did you play Little League?
Well, I was born in Long Branch, and we lived there. Actually, I born in Long Branch, lived with my grandparents, actually my grandfather, in Red Bank, New Jersey.
Okay.
Which is not a short town, but near a short town. And we lived there for probably 3 or 4 years, upstairs in an apartment above my grandfather. In a great Italian neighborhood. It was really special. My mother's name was Migliazza. So Whitmore, that's my father's side, English and Cherokee Indian, but I probably get a lot of my characteristics from my mom from the Mediterranean. But we grew up in Point Pleasant, and just a great place to grow up. It was a seashore resort area. We lived about 1.5 miles from the ocean. Typical same houses. We played ball in the neighborhood. We did things together. But I just remember a great childhood. I went to a parochial grammar school where my mother, who worked, like I had mentioned earlier, in a sweatshop 5 days a week sewing coats, on the weekends she would go to the convent, to the school I went to, and my sisters at St. Peter's. She would cook and clean for the nuns on the weekends. So she was a 7-dayer.
Yeah.
But we did the typical things: Little League, Babe Ruth ball, CYO basketball, soccer, which I did in high school. But it was just a great place to live. And the other piece that I had that a lot of folks don't have is the surfing. Living a mile and a half
Sure.
from the beach, we did a lot of surfing in those days. So it was just a well-rounded family. Again, I had 6 uncles and an aunt, and all their families were around, and the cousins. Something like we don't see today, where it's just really a great experience being around family. And but I did the typical stuff that everybody else did. Wanted to be an athlete, wanted to be a musician, played the trumpet, and actually had a lip for it, but I gave up playing the trumpet to play baseball. And in reflection, I probably should have stuck with the trumpet.
So let's talk about baseball. You played Little League, not too far from Tom's River, who was the 1998 World Series champion. Do you remember that time
I do.
on Tom's
I do.
River?
Yeah,
Did you
Tom's
ever
River's-
have to play them?
We did. Yeah, they were always good. For whatever reason, they were always good. Another town right near the shore area, the beach.
Yep.
But a great spot.
Yeah, and in 2010 they went back to the show, to the World Series, but they got eliminated early by Ohio. But
You really have done your homework,
they
Michael.
do have a good legacy. Yeah. Thanks. So high school, where did you attend? And tell me about the year you graduated, played sports, favorite sport, that kind of stuff, your high school experience.
Sure. Point Pleasant has 2 high schools. It originally was one high school, Point Pleasant Beach. And then the community just grew, and any seashore town at those days in the 60s and 70s, all the New Yorkers would come and visit in the summer and buy the cottages. So it really grew. So they built another high school, Point Pleasant Borough, where my 2 sisters also went, an older sister and a younger sister. And I went to high school there, and it was a great experience. I played soccer in the fall, basketball in the winter, and track and field in the spring. So I was a 3-sport athlete. Really enjoyed it a great deal. But basketball was my passion. Basketball is what I really enjoyed doing and playing. And I would spend summers, weekends, nights, going down to the park right next to the beach, which was about, like I said, a mile and a half, ride my bike, hitchhike safely in those days. But every hour I could, I'd be at the park trying to improve my game.
Yeah, you mentioned hitchhiking. I did a fair share of hitchhiking, and today I tell my kids, don't hitchhike. But back then you could.
It was a safe world back then, a lot safer.
A lot safer. People would pick you up, you'd get to your destination, and today you wouldn't even think of it. When I see a hitchhiker, I feel bad because I want to pick them up because that's what I did, but I wouldn't do it. Right. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah, you can learn a story because everybody's got a story to tell.
Yeah. Talk about, you mentioned a 3-sport athlete, typically football in the fall, winter basketball, spring baseball. Kids today are staying with one sport and at an early age. Is that good or bad?
Well, I really think it's bad. I've always had the philosophy, and when we raise our 3 kids, is that up to the 8th grade, you ought to try every activity out there. And we had an unwritten rule in our family was that every season you had to either play a sport, perform in a theater, or play an instrument, up to the 8th grade. Then when they got to the 9th grade, you've expanded a lot of opportunities. You did a little of this, a little of that. So you've got to taste different things, different coaches, different teachers. And then in the high school, then select what you really want to do. But I think kids today are just pigeonholed or pressured into concentrating and specializing in one sport and doing that 4 seasons a year. And I really think it's a detriment to a lot of them instead of doing a lot of different activities.
Go back to the 50s and 60s, which was your childhood. It was also a time of heightened tensions in the world, the Cold War. Nuclear missiles, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. Were you aware of those things that were going on, the drills, duck and cover, that kind of stuff?
Yes, but I still remember those vividly. Practicing for air raids, going underneath your desk, going out in the hallway, covering your head. Those things don't change. They really don't. And those are memories that I'll never forget. Just like when JFK was assassinated. I know exactly where I was at the time those things you just don't forget. So I was well groomed in that in New Jersey.
And where were you in JFK when you heard?
I actually was coming home from school and got home, and the first thing we all did was put the TV on and watch the news. But it was a tragedy, obviously, but I remember vividly what we were doing. Just like 9/11, you remember things.
Yeah, I remember what my first reaction. I was stunned because it was the first time I saw my dad cry. And my mom and dad were huge JFK fans, and there was tears in our house over that, and the nation as well.
Yeah,
so,
same here. We were Roman Catholics, and same thing.
Yep, absolutely. The other thing that was happening in the late 60s and 70s, it was a war we were in over in Vietnam. Do you remember those times, the nightly news of the war, and did you have any friends who went and served and did not come home?
Well, I did have some friends who, and that was everybody was concerned about either enlisting, getting drafted, or going to college and getting deferred from the draft, and what number you got. That's when we had the numbers. And if you got a low number, you were going, which if I got a low number, I would have gladly gone. But my number was high, and my aspirations were to get a college education, be the first one in my family. But I did have friends who weren't the college route type that went into the service.
Yep.
And then one fellow didn't come home, and that hit home. Well, he gave his life for our country and the patriotism. So I didn't get involved in whether it was right or wrong to be over there. Is that it was protecting our rights as Americans and the freedoms that we do have. So I never really concentrated too much about the right or wrong and the political views at that time.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to correct you because I happen to have the random selection sequence of the draft of 1970, and on July 22nd, 1970, you were 153. And in 72, you were 145. And that year, they drafted 49,000 young men to serve. So you would have been there.
Yep.
If you went, if you were to volunteer for a branch of the military, what would it have been?
Probably my heart says the Marines, but my father was in the Army, so I probably would have went with the Army because it's got more opportunities and different choices. But that was my second career. I mean, people meet me all the time and they say, "You must have been in the military," and I said, "I come from a dad in the military, and that would have been a route." But I wanted to coach, I wanted to teach, and the only way I could do that was by getting a college education.
Yeah. Well, as a son of a Marine, I can feel your duty to go to the Marines first. But they are trigger pullers and they go in harm's way. So God love all the men and women.
My father had some great duties. He was in Honolulu, Hawaii,
Okay. Yeah.
Sydney, Australia, and then New Guinea. So he had some great spots.
Wow, that's awesome. Great stuff. Let's get back to high school now, your high school days. I'm sure you go back in those days as mine. Athletes drank alcohol with little or no repercussions, typically. Wink and a nod, kids will be kids. Can't punish the star athlete of the team. Did you see some of that when you were in high school?
Most certainly. And back then, I was strong-willed, and then drinking was not important to me. Drugs was not important to me, so I did not partake in any of that. But I did have friends that did, and one of them died. Another one, just his future was really flushed down the toilet because of that, because of drugs. So I did see it, and I did see, I remember vividly the quarterback on our football team who was very talented. And he would, he was like a lot of kids back then. They would party, and there was no rules, so you didn't sign a contract. The coach would talk to you, but there was no really reinforcement.
Right.
Or accountability. It was more so, boys will be boys. Yeah. And turn the other cheek and look the other way.
Today it's a different ballgame. What's the policy if a kid gets caught either with drinking or drugs?
At Bedford High School, every school has a different policy.
Let's go with Bedford.
The policy is because we want to make it educational and not the one and done, the death penalty where you get caught smoking, drinking, doing drugs, that you're done for the season, the year you're done for. We wanted to make it educational. So the process is we have 3 offenses. The first offense would be a 14-day suspension from playing in any games, meets, or matches. You have to do counseling, 10 hours of community service, and then you have to put in writing a letter, a reflective narrative on what you learned through this process. And that narrative is your ticket back on the team to practice, to go to games, but not participate. And thank goodness the strong majority of our kids that have made mistakes, because we all make mistakes, have learned from that. The second offense is a little more stringent. Figures that, well, you haven't learned the first time, so you're going to end up now the second time is that you're going to be removed, or you remove yourself, because we make choices. So Bill Whitmore didn't remove an athlete. The school didn't remove an athlete. You remove yourself by your choices. You have to be held accountable, and there are consequences. So the second offense is you're done from that sport for the season. Third offense, which thank goodness we've never had at Bedford High School, is 365. You don't play a sport for 365. That's our co-curricular expectations.
And the kids sign a contract, so they know the rules.
They do, and the parents, but just like anything else in our society today, in our world, it's just we're all in a hurry. Sometimes they read it, sometimes they don't read it. When I have our Meet the Coaches night and I do a little quiz, they look at me like it's something that they've never heard before. But they do. They sign a contract that they'll abide by the expectations and that they understand the expectations.
So, speaking about alcohol, drugs, today the biggest problem, not in the high school level, but also in the nation, is heroin. In the past, the gateway drug was marijuana. Today, it's Vicodin and Percocet, usually prescribed legally due to a sports injury. What's the long-term solution to kids who are getting hooked on these drugs because of sports injuries?
Well, obviously, more monitoring by doctors, by parents, just more overseeing and accountability. In the old days, the physicians would write those prescriptions like they would be having chiclets to chew. And now, because of the crisis, they're tightening up. And there's some people who actually need the medication, whether it's back surgery, back injuries, that they can't do anything without that medication. So it's a double-edged sword where there are people who need it, but there are people who are abusing it and becoming dependent on it. And as a society, we really need to hold people accountable. And I'm convinced that along the way, we've made things too easy, that we've not held people accountable, that we've not had consequences, that we haven't paid attention to the details and the little things that might have caught somebody early on and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not okay. And I see more and more of that today, because we never want to lose a young person or anybody to drugs or alcohol. That's a tragedy. Have
you seen that here in Bedford High School, the drug abuse due to a sports injury, and have gone deeper?
I have not seen that.
Okay.
No, I've not seen that side of it.
Okay. All right. Good. Let's talk about your college days. St. Bonaventure University, Franciscan order. Mm-hmm. Favorite memory at college?
Favorite memory? Favorite memory was the teacher, the professor that I admired the most. I was a physical education major and a biology minor. And John Skean, who swam at Springfield College, one of the best PE schools in the country still, was the professor of that class. He was also the head of the department. And he was as tough as they come. So anything you got, you earned. And I remember taking an aquatics class that all PE majors were required to take. And it was the toughest class I had taken, not except academics, the kinesiology, the anatomy, physiology. But I remember vividly after taking the test in the water and coming by the side of the pool and trying to get out of the pool, and I was exhausted. And he said, turned down to me, says, do you think you passed? And I said, absolutely I passed. But I would do more for him because his standards were so high, and you wanted to do it for him, but do it for yourself to show what you were capable of doing. Yep. And he got the most out of us. So out of all my memories, that's one that I remember, and it taught me a lesson. That was my obligation someday as a coach and a teacher to bring the best out of students, whether it's in the classroom or in the athletic arena, but to show them what they were capable of doing and to do that in a supportive way.
Yeah. Now, St. Bonaventure, that's in the western part of New York?
It's located in Olean, New York, which is about 65 miles southwest of the beautiful city of Buffalo.
Yeah.
Mark Twain once said that Lake Erie runs by Buffalo, and I don't blame it. But Buffalo's always been a great city. We've enjoyed it. But that's it's in Olean, New York,
Yeah.
home of the Enchanted Mountains.
Yeah. Speaking of Olean, New York, while you were there at St. Bonaventure, there was a shooting in a high school where this student, 17-year-old kid, gunned down 3 people, injured 11 others. Probably one of the first major tragedies that we thought about back in '74. This was pre-Columbine. In today's environment, we're almost numb to the possibility of violence in high school, Columbine being the standard. What are we doing today to make our students safe? And is there a solution to this school violence?
Well, there are a lot of things we're doing, and I remember that, Mike, when that happened. And I drove by. I actually coached as a junior and senior in college at St. Bonaventure. I coached the basketball team in Olean High. And I remember going by that high school in the front and looking up at that, I think it was the 3rd floor or the 4th floor, and looking at that classroom. And it just gave me an eerie feeling that it was possible anywhere. If it could hit Olean, New York, it could hit any place. So there's so many safeguards that Bedford High School and the school district here in general puts in for our students. There's written policies. We practice those standards. We go through drills religiously. So our students are prepared for those. So I think we're doing everything we possibly can to keep students and faculty and staff safe at Bedford High School. Is there a solution? I think you just have to pay attention. One of the beautiful things at Bedford High is that in order to get in this building, because they've got teachers at every door during the school day, you've got to have a pass or somebody's got to let you in, and then you've got to call ahead if you're going inside the building to an office or to a classroom. So I think we have tremendous safeguards put in place here at Bedford High School, and we're doing everything we possibly can. But to stop that lone wolf, somebody that's just having some mental problems, if you put the safeguards in, but I use 2 words in everything I do. We all have to pay attention. There's signs, but we have to pay attention to pick up those signs.
Sure.
Parents have to pick up those signs. Teachers, coaches, administrators.
Under the theory, see something, say something.
Exactly. I call it care to confront.
Yeah.
And in our society today, and in places that I've coached and taught, people, whether they're intimidated, they don't want to bother, if something goes wrong and you care about that person, you have to confront. And we don't, as a society, confront.
I think we have to get over the mentality of, don't be a rat. You're being a rat if you turn somebody in. Really, it's serious stuff. The other thing I love about what we do here is we have our school resource officer. And I think we should pay any amount to keep the man or woman who's in our building with our kids with a weapon for this unbelievable, potential. Which
I
we
agree,
hope never
Mike.
comes.
I agree wholeheartedly.
So let's jump over to UVM. 8 years Division I basketball. Tell us about
Actually, it was 9 years.
9 years. Yeah. Thank you.
At Vermont.
Vermont, yeah, University of Vermont. Tell us about how you got there and your experience there at the college level.
Sure. It all started when I graduated from St. Bonaventure in 1975. And what I had done my junior and senior years at St. Bonaventure, I would travel the country from the Pocono Mountains out to John Wooden Camp, Jerry West's camp, Jack Ramsey, who did the Portland Trail Blazers, George Raveling at Washington State, and I would spend 10 weeks every summer working at basketball camps. So I could get as much knowledge about the game, I could make as many contacts, and it was a great way to see the country. So when I left St. Bonaventure, I had coached 2 years, I had mentioned earlier, at Olean High School as an assistant coach with the varsity program. So when I graduated, I had experience that nobody else had coming out. So I was turning down head jobs in New Jersey, in New York, and Pennsylvania. Took a job at Rushford Central School in Western New York at the age of 23. Was the head of the PE department, director of athletics, taught PE grades K through 12, head boys varsity soccer coach, head boys varsity basketball coach. Now that does not happen today. But I had the experience, I was willing to work. So I did that for 2 years. And the neat thing, Rushford, and this has been written in books, it's kind of like Hoosiers. I took over a program that had 6 previous losing seasons. And basketball was the sport in the community. So they needed to have somebody to come in and make basketball competitive again. And I went in and I was given an opportunity, and we ended up winning a state championship my first year. And then had success the second year, and then I said, my aspirations are to coach college basketball. So I sent out letters to every college, every Division I school. I think back then there was 175 of them, not like today, over 300, yeah. To every head coach saying, I'd be interested in working as a graduate assistant, an assistant coach, any opening you have, please consider me.
And this is no internet. This is letters,
written letters, handwritten letters,
in
exactly.
The box. Yeah.
And I took 2 years of typing at high school, and I took it in college. Yeah. So I was pretty good as a typist. So I sent everything out, and you're right. Put in an envelope in a mail, put a stamp on it, and bam, out it went. And when I would get those rejections from the majority of coaches in the college ranks, but I got one from the University of Vermont, from a fellow by the name of Peter Salzberg, who went to Columbia, was an assistant at Columbia, and at that time in 1977 was the head coach at the University of Vermont. He said, Bill, your resume and what you've done at the high school level intrigues me. He said, we're playing Niagara. I'll be at the Buffalo airport. I'd like to interview you. And that was 1977. Oh. So I interviewed. He offered me the position as his top assistant coach on the spot. It took me 5 months to decide whether to take that job as an assistant coach at the University of Vermont. A good friend of mine, Stu Aberdeen, was an associate head coach at the University of Tennessee. Tremendous basketball in the SEC. Yeah. And I had worked his camps, and I called him up. I said, Coach, what should I do? I'm coaching high school ball. I've got a great situation. We're successful. Now I've got an opportunity to go to the University of Vermont as an assistant coach. I'm taking a half cut in pay. I was making $13,000. I'm going to make $5,000 at Vermont. And he said, Bill, if you want to coach college, you got to take the job. He said, get a couple years experience, and then I'll take you with me. So that was the plan.
Wait a minute, did they at least give you room and board there along with the $5,000?
It's an interesting story. I lived with the director of athletics, with him and his family.
Okay.
I ate my meals. Now this was an interesting one. We're beautiful campus at UVM,
sure.
But the head of Saga, they had a strict policy that they didn't feed anybody unless you paid. But I had a friend, through a friend, that was the director of food over at St. Michael's College.
Oh, nice.
Division II, about 2 miles away from the university. And he said, Bill, you can eat at St. Michael's whenever you want. Nice. So I would eat all my meals at St. Mike's, and I'd run into the players at St. Mike's, and they would always ask me, say, Coach, why do you eat over here, not at UVM? And my standard line was, well, the food's better at St. Mike's. So I was a lucky man.
Well, when it's free, it's always better.
It is. It tasted really good. I didn't have to cook or go shopping.
So
that started me at UVM.
That's good. So hold on, let me got a quick question here while you're still there. Paying athletes at the college level, good thing, bad thing? What's your thought on that?
I really haven't thought a whole lot about it. I mean, they've got room, board, books, and tuition when I was at UVM and St. Bonaventure. And they had the Pell Grant, which if you were needy, and we had kids at both schools that got a Pell Grant. And that was money from the federal government that would help subsidize your travel, your clothing, being able to go to the movies for kids who couldn't afford it. So that really, in my estimation, full grant and aid scholarship, room, board, books, and tuition, qualified for the Pell Grant. I think kids did okay. What's happened, Mike, over the years is that the NCAA, and it started with the Big East and the TV contracts, and now it's just gone crazy. With the money.
Yeah.
So everybody's saying, well, wait, I want a piece of the pie. And I don't have anything, and the NCAA's making millions, the school's making millions. Maybe I ought to be getting something to live. So I am sympathetic to that, and there is some merit. But back when I started, I think kids were pretty well happy with a full grant and aid scholarship and the Pell Grant.
Well, I think they were happy because most of the kids took advantage of the 4-year degree.
You're right.
Today it's one and done with our buddy John Calipari and other coaches at the Division I level. So from that point of view, kids looked at that as a real bonus. You know, the bonus was they're going to get an education, they're going to get some room and board, they're going to travel a little bit, and they're going to have a great experience. And then when they get out, they can get a job.
You're right on the money.
Yeah.
Right on the money. And UVM was such a great institution. I always kidded people. I said we were an academic school and a non-academic conference.
Yeah. It's a beautiful campus up there.
Yeah,
When was the last time you were up there?
We try to go back once a year
Okay.
in August or September because that's where my wife and I met and we were married.
Yeah.
So that's really one of our traditions.
Tell me your thoughts on Title IX.
Title IX.
And tell us what Title IX is if people don't know.
Well, I'll give you an interesting story, and it's a little later on in my career at Concord High School. But when I took the job there in 1990, they said, you were, besides being the director of athletics, you're also the Title IX coordinator. And I said, well, I have no knowledge about Title IX. What do I do? I said, you don't have to do anything. This was 1990. And,
Okay.
But so all it really was, he said, all you got to do is open the letters, read it, and file it. So for probably 5 or 6 years, I was the Title IX coordinator for a huge school district, 11 buildings, and the capital of the state. But Title IX always meant to me is that equal opportunity for everyone. And it's 100% right on the money. And
When you say everyone, you're talking male, female. I mean, everyone, obviously, black, white is
the
included,
program
but
should mirror each other.
right.
There should be no differences because there aren't any differences.
There aren't. That's the way it should be. But there are some schools through Title IX to save money have closed programs. I know UNH closed the men's baseball team to save money a few years back. So they've played games with it. But Title IX means there's opportunity for women to play sports at the college level, high school level, and be on a fair playing field when it comes to funds, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
Correct, but people misunderstand where you don't equate it, Title IX, at the high school level or the college level, you don't mirror programs. So if I offer 15 sports for boys and 13 for girls, and football isn't one of those sports, it's the number of opportunities. You have to give the same number of opportunities for the girls that you do to the boys. And if there's no interest in an opportunity, that doesn't mean they're in violation of Title IX, but it's the number of opportunities for both genders.
Okay, all right. What happened, well, your best experience at UVM, your many years there, what was your favorite memory on that in that program?
Favorite memory was when I was an assistant coach, and we, back then, even when I was the head coach at UVM, we had to play what I call money games. So we had to travel and play Notre Dame, Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, because they guaranteed you play them, you got a $10,000 check, and basically they expected they were buying wins. But we used that money to put back into the program.
Okay.
My second year as an assistant coach, 1978, Ohio State, who had a tremendous team, and Clark Kellogg was a freshman on that team. And they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and they were touted as the best freshman class in America. And they played us at Patrick Gym in Burlington on a Saturday afternoon. And Eldon Miller, who was the coach back then, brought his team in. They had Sports Illustrated with them because they were traveling to do an article. And the gods were favorable to UVM that day in our program in the Catamounts. We upset Ohio State. It was a packed crowd, and it was an unbelievable experience beating the Buckeyes. And then the following week, when the article about Ohio State came out, there was one sentence about them losing at Vermont. So there was no justice in that, but that's probably my best memory at UVM, whether it was an assistant coach or the head coach.
Did you have any of your players go on to, and we can go back through your whole spectrum, your 42 years of coaching, did you have any of your athletes go on to a pro career?
We had some who went over and played in Europe, but never any who played in the NBA.
How about other sports? I know a couple of kids from Concord High School went on to play pro ball, but that was in the 70s and you weren't there.
Right, right. I thought if it was when I was coaching, no, but when I was a director of athletics, yes.
You remember some of those kids as a director?
Well, when I was at Concord, we had a run of about 7 or 8 years where we had at least one Division I basketball player in the program. And one of those happened to be Matt Bonner, who played at the University of Florida.
Of course.
Had a 12-year pro career, started off with the Raptors in Toronto, then went over to San Antonio, won a couple NBA rings. He was just an unbelievable young man. And I've got a story that I'll never forget. His junior and senior year, we had the opportunity to play in national tournaments. And I did all the negotiating with those the commissioners who ran those tournaments. And one was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and then the second year was at NC State, Raleigh, North Carolina. So I could basically say I needed 20 plane tickets for our team, coaches, and administrators. We needed complete hotels for everyone. We needed meals. So we were able to do that on the coattails of Matt Bonner because he was one of the top high school recruits in the nation.
Sure.
Sneaker companies wanted us to wear their shoes. We ended up wearing Adidas. So one trip we're in Fort Lauderdale playing at the Crail Classic, one of the best tournaments in the country at that time. And Matt Bonner had a ritual that every day he had to make 100 three-point shots. So that's not how many he shot, whatever it took, but he had to make 100. And we were playing one day where we could not get into a gym. So we got in the rent-a-car, drove over to the outdoor courts in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where he could shoot and make his 100 three-pointers.
And what time of year was it? You said it was summertime?
That was in December.
Oh, December.
In
Okay,
December.
so it
Playing in
wasn't-
the holiday
okay.
tournament. But he could have easily said, well, this day I can't make it. But he was so determined and had a tremendous work ethic. And he said, no, I've got to do it.
Yeah.
So that doesn't surprise me that he had a great career at Florida and a very good career in the NBA for 12 years. He was just a rare young man and a straight A student.
Yeah, he is a rare young man. In the families, there's some basketball players in the family, but I think what he did recently when he announced his retirement from the NBA, put together a little video that was kind of funny. And if people want to see that, that's out there on YouTube.
Yeah, he had mentioned one thing. He went to he's very good friends with our family and our sons, especially our son Nick, who coaches basketball at New Hampton.
Okay.
And at Nick's wedding 3 years ago in Vermont, Matt attended with his wife, and he came over to me and said, Mr. Whitmore, I want to tell you this one thing you told me when I was a high school student that I remember and I try to do to this day. And I said, well, Matt, I said a lot of things during that time. I said, can you share that with me? He said, sure. He said, you talked about helping other people. And I have a saying that you can get anything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. And he said, I've never forgotten that.
Nice.
And I've tried to use that in my life, my personal life, and my career to help other people. That's the real meaning of what we do in this business.
Yeah, great story. So after UVM, where did you go?
UVM, I got a chance to coach at St. Bonaventure, where I went to college,
Yep.
and where I coached high school ball. So I moved my family, my wife and 2 sons to Olean, and coached as an assistant coach there for 3 years under Ron DeCarli. And I had met Ron at the University of Maryland. We both were out recruiting, and we bumped into each other. And the story about Ron DeCarli was he beat cancer. He had cancer of the lymph nodes, and it killed him for 2 years. He went through chemotherapy, and he beat it. And he lived for the moment. He lived for the day. And I haven't met a better man, a family man, a religious man than Ron DeCarli. So when he said, when you come to St. Bonaventure and help me coach there. And when I had a chance to come back to my alma mater and coach and be back in Olean, I jumped at the opportunity. And I remember vividly flying into the Buffalo airport with my wife. And she was in tears driving from the airport to Olean because she had never been to Olean. And Olean is a good hour and 10 minutes. And really, it's a beautiful country, but it's in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And she cried for that hour-and-a-half drive. To make a long story short, when we left there and through the 7 places we've been, and we've been at great places to live, she said Olean was my favorite.
Nice.
So you just never know.
Yeah. Grows on you.
It does, and it was just because it's blue collar.
Yeah.
And I just have always liked blue collar people because I grew up with blue collar people.
Yeah, sure. I totally understand.
So St. Bonaventure was a great opportunity, and to coach at the big time level. And we did that for 3 years. And then I was offered a job at Texas A&M with Shelby Metcalf. And went home to my wife and said, we've got an opportunity to go to College Station and coach basketball at Texas A&M.
Which was big. I mean, you're talking
Southwest Conference then.
You're talking stepping stones here. You're going, you're moving.
Yes, yeah, the big time basketball.
And then according to your wife, she came out with this great line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she said, and I was excited about it, and I've always said that she's a lot smarter than I am. And she said that if you're going to Texas, you're going by yourself, because we're not going, because you're never home. And that was true. For 12 years, that was back then where they didn't have the guidelines. When I was at Vermont, you recruited 365 days a year.
Sure.
And for a little school like Vermont, to try to get the kids from BC or Northeastern or BU, we had to try to outwork them. So literally you were never home.
Right.
And so she got to the point where, and she made a lot of sense. And I said, you're right, we're going to change gears and then we're going to go into administration because I think I might be good at that.
Yeah.
So that's when we got off that college train. And again, I never forget the AD at the University of Vermont who hired me, Danny Lambert, said, Bill, God has other plans for you. And he was right.
And how old were you at that time?
I was the youngest Division I coach when I got the job at the UVM as the head coach. I was 28 years old.
Yeah.
And then I had to be 8, 5, 32, probably 36 years old.
When you came to Littleton, New Hampshire?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're going to get to that, but a couple of other questions. When it comes to officials and officiating, what is a good official?
A good official who's somebody who knows the rules. Rote repetition, just knows it by heart. Somebody who gets in the proper position, gets up and down the field, up and down the court, but is in a position to make that call. And a lot of them are judgment, but if you're not in position, you can't make the best judgment. And then someone who is consistent, so not making one call the first quarter, completely a 360 on the call on a block or a charge the second quarter or the second half, but they're consistent and they're honest.
And they call it both ways.
That's honesty.
That's the consistency.
That is honesty and being consistent.
Yeah. Versus the official who does it for money. We've all run into these guys. They do basketball, they do football, they do soccer, they do volleyball, and they're good, but you can tell they're doing it for the money. What's the mentality there?
Well, I have a sweet spot in my heart for officials, and I never really got it when I was a college coach or a high school coach starting out, because I was more focused on trying to win. Being good to kids, getting degrees, which all our kids graduated, but you're focused on winning. So it was really a narrow observation of officials. When I became a director of athletics, I got to know them as people and that they're doing the best job they can. Now, some get in it to make a little extra money on the side, but if they're any good and they're worth their salt and they last in the profession, they do it because they enjoy it and they're good at what they do and they want to give back and be a participant in that activity. So I have a sweet spot in my heart for officials because I know what they do and how hard that job is.
Well, I can personally attest to that because I was a high school baseball official and I always enjoyed going to Concord because I knew before the game this sharp-dressed guy with a great tan would come up and hand me my check, shake my hand, and say, "Have a good game." And I didn't know you at the time other than that, but it was Bill Whitmore. So, and you were always there.
Well, I like to see people. I like to meet people. I like to get to know people. And the only way Yogi Berra had a great line. He says, you can observe a lot by just watching. And in order for me to observe and to learn, I had to be there. And you were an integral part of, if you're an umpire, of that game.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to evaluate you, to get to know you as a person, and to make sure you had the best experience that you could when you were working our games.
Yeah, had a great experience. I always had a good experience going to Concord.
But that was important to me.
So let's go to Littleton. Tell me about your move to Littleton. What did you do? What was your...
Littleton, I was offered a job as a director of athletics at Pioneer in New York, which was about 30 minutes outside of Olean. So I had a choice of going the athletic route in Pioneer, a big school, or taking an assistant principal job at Lakeway Elementary in Littleton, New Hampshire. So I tossed and turned, and my wife said, you know, we really like New England. Western New York's okay, but her family lived in Burlington, and I'd like to kind of get back to that neck of the woods. So went, interviewed, I got the job. They offered me the job that night. They had never had an assistant principal at that elementary school.
Nice.
And I went home and we talked about it with my wife and kids, and we said, let's go to Lakeway, let's go to Littleton, and started my administrative career. And one of the things that I always went ahead of my family, any of the 7 moves, whether I had to stay and rent a room, stay in a hotel, was the case when I went to St. Bonaventure to work during the summer, and my family stayed, and then we eventually made the move. But I remember vividly at Lakeway, staying at a 70-year-old woman's house. I rented a room upstairs, and that was the 3rd time I had done that in my career. An elderly woman who just needed somebody, the companionship of somebody being in the house.
Sure.
And it worked out well. But I remember the first time I walked into Lakeway Elementary School, and it was in July. And I walked through and I said, everything was all over the hallways. It was a mess. Little did I know is that's when they take the furniture and the desks out of the room to clean it and to do the floors. So I walked in there and I said, we can't have the place looking like this. Then it dawned on me, okay, we got to clear the rooms. They'll look good when we finish. But I spent probably a month to 5 weeks living in Littleton by myself and working that job until my family made the move.
Yeah.
So I have fond memories of Littleton.
Best memory of Littleton? You got a favorite one?
Yes. Favorite one of Littleton is when I, first day on the job, I was working for a gentleman by the name of Grant Harris, who hired me. Had spent 30 to 35 years as a principal all over New England. And this was the waning years of his career, but just had a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. So I come in and I say, Grant, where's my office? He says, you don't need an office. I said, now, mind you, I had spent 12 years at the college level where I had my own office,
Sure.
had my own secretary, made my own schedule, came and gone when I pleased, ate when I wanted to eat, but now it was different. So I said, Grant, I need an office. I need a desk. I can't work without an office. He said, okay, Bill, we'll get you an office. And then I said to him, well, when do I eat my lunch? And he said, well, once school starts, we don't eat lunch. And I said, no, I eat lunch. Whether I take 20 minutes or a half hour to walk outside the building, but I eat lunch. And it turned out to be a tremendous relationship between he and I and the things that we did together that year. But that's the first memory I had, and there's just certain things weren't acceptable, and that was not acceptable, not to have an office and to be able to go eat lunch when I wanted to.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So after that, you went to Concord.
Yes.
You went from a small school in Littleton, New Hampshire, to probably the 2nd or 3rd largest high school in the state of New Hampshire. What brought you to Concord?
The athletic. I missed the athletics. I enjoyed Littleton and probably at the elementary position, but I'll give you a little story that led up to that. When I was interviewed for the job at Concord, and I was getting close to, I knew I was going to get the position, so I met the superintendent of schools in Littleton. And I went to see him, and I said, to tell him basically I was going to be leaving to take a job in Concord. And I walked in, and he said, Bill, we've got great news for you. Great news. And I said, Tim, what's that? He says, we're going to make you the principal next year of Lakeway Elementary School. And I said, I really appreciate it, but I missed the athletics, and I'm taking my family to Concord. So, but I had to do, they never had a student handbook for the students and parents. So that was one of my last details, was to write the student parent handbook, which I did in about 2 weeks.
Nice.
Then I was off to Concord because I missed the athletics. So
you're back in athletics. It's really your, where you came from, it's your heart and soul. Talk to us about sportsmanship and what is sportsmanship.
Sportsmanship is what I call the golden rule. And it's the way we're raised. It's the values we have. It's how you treat people. It's how you have a proper perspective on games. And most of the times people don't have a proper perspective on games because it's all about the winning, it's all about the yelling, it's all about putting people down. And sportsmanship, the golden rule, is treating others as you want to be treated yourself. And that's one area I always like because you can control your behavior. Most times you can't control games. You're not controlling the team you play against. Sometimes the calls the official makes. Some days the ball's going in, some days you hit it, some days you don't. But you can always control the type of person you are and the class that you have and your language. So that's where I first bought into sportsmanship, was how you treat other people. You need to be a class act, and you need to rise above things. And those were the lessons that I always felt were important for kids to take and learn with them. And along the way, the community is learning, the parents are learning. But that's one of the things, and the integrity to me is a huge word. And you have to have integrity. You don't turn it on and off like a faucet. You have integrity all the time to make the tough decisions, to be consistent. And sometimes to make those decisions when they're unpopular, but you know they're the right decisions for the right reasons.
And you expect that out of your coaches and your students, athletes, correct?
I had to have everybody buy in.
Yeah.
And if the coaches didn't buy in on a daily basis, who were the role models and working with the kids, then I was not, and we were not, going to be successful. So the coaches had to buy in, and if their behavior was unbecoming or something that wasn't positive as a role model, detriment to our program, to our school, then that was addressed. And I talked earlier about caring to confront. And I never embarrassed the coach. I would do it at the right time, at the right place. And only one time I had to interrupt a coach during a game because his behavior was not acceptable to me and to what our program was all about. And I addressed it on the spot.
Did you go to the official and ask for timeout first?
I went to the coach.
Oh, okay.
And that coach lasted about 10 hours, and he was done.
He was done.
He was done the next day.
Yeah.
But that's the only time. But I try to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're teaching. And either you're going to fit what we're doing or you're not going to fit.
And it's not easy firing a coach, and I'm sure that's the toughest part of your job. I know recently there was a coach here at Bedford that had a confrontation with an official. There was a opportunity for that coach to take some punishment. He wouldn't. You let him go. What's the toughest thing about letting a coach go when you fire him?
Being a former coach and living it and wearing those moccasins and understanding what it's all about, you like to do it in a graceful, dignified fashion.
Okay.
And a lot of times you evaluate a coach, and if they don't make improvement, you give them every opportunity to make improvement. And then if they don't make that improvement, the choice has already been made that you just didn't meet that standard. When coaches don't get it, and you give them every opportunity, and they still don't get it, and that's when you have to make the tough choice to say it's not working. It's just not a right fit. I'm big into fits. And if you can't change a person, then you have to change the person from that position. So those are always difficult, but I always tried to have coaches have the last say and have a chance to improve and to say that, you know what, it's not working, I appreciate your help. I remember one coach that I had to let go and didn't come back, and wasn't here in Bedford, and he just couldn't see the writing on the wall. But years later, he came back to me, and he said, Bill, you were right on the money. And I learned a great lesson from that. And I appreciate it. I didn't see it at the time, but you were right. So you can't be afraid to make those decisions, but they have to be in the right framework, and you have to always think about people's dignity.
Yeah, of course. Winning versus losing. You've been involved with several great sports teams in your career. One is a boys tennis team, and I'm not talking about the Bedford High boys team that's coached by Shauna Morley with a 90-plus game winning streak. I'm talking about the Concord High boys tennis team of the 90s who had 127 straight matches without a loss, 7 straight championship state titles. May have been a national record, I'm not sure. What's the message to the team and the athletes when they lose that streak?
The message is that you went out and you did your best, and it was bound to happen. I mean, you're not going to win forever. But when you lose that time, you need to be as humble as you are in victory and prepare for defeat. And that lead comes from the head coach of that program.
Yep.
And you have to prepare kids for that. It's not easy, but I think back to those days in Concord where Harvey Smith, who was the coach,
Yes.
who had the winningest percentage in high school sports. It was like 98% win-loss record.
Legendary.
Yes. But those kids bounced back from that loss, and I think it might have been to West High School, if I'm not mistaken.
My next question.
Yeah, West High School, and it was bound to happen, and then you see what people are made out of. I've always said that winning doesn't reveal character. Losing reveals character.
Yeah, and Harvey Smith, just for the record, had retired, and it was this new assistant that took over the team that actually lost that record. That was 2005, coached by Shauna Morley, who is now your boys tennis coach here in Bedford. 19 out of the 20 kids on that team were Bedford kids who went to West. And the senior captain's a little plug, my son Matt and his buddy Ryan Callahan. So great. Great
Michael,
time.
I love your preparation. I love it.
That's all we can do is prepare. Today there's an individual by the name of Kaepernick, ex-quarterback, San Francisco, kneeling down during the national anthem. What are your thoughts when we talk about sportsmanship, when you see a pro athlete doing something that a lot of people think are disrespectful? Some people think he's a hero. I personally think it's more on the disrespectful side. What are your thoughts when you see an athlete do that?
From my upbringing, from my philosophy, from the standards that I have, from the wisdom that I've garnered over all these years, is that it's just there's a time and place. If you want to do that, that was not the time nor the place in my estimation. If you're a member of a team, you're representing the team. And we impress upon that to our high school athletes all the time. You're one member of a team. If you want to take a stand, you do that outside of this venue. And Kaepernick used professional football and the 49ers and the owners of that organization and that city to benefit him. Now, he used it and he said that it's going to benefit others. He wanted to make a statement. I didn't buy it then. I don't buy it now.
Yeah.
That's not what we're about. And I would be very disappointed if our kids didn't stand during an anthem, didn't respect the flag. But there's a time and place to do other things, but that's not the time nor the place. Patriotism is huge, and we're getting ready for one of the biggest holidays on Monday, Memorial Day. And what kind of lessons are we teaching our young folks?
Yeah.
And when we have people who die, I lost an uncle, people lost a lot through war, and there's a time and there's a place, but in my estimation, that was not the time. And I believe, I don't think he's been picked up by an NFL team.
Well, my comment was going to be, not only do you and I don't believe in what he's doing, but about 30 other NFL teams have passed on him. And he's got, clearly has talent, but he has baggage. And that goes to...
so that speaks volumes.
Yeah. Yeah. We forget, back in '68 in the Summer Olympics in Mexico, there were 2 athletes who did that Black Power protest. And that was a huge uproar back then. And everybody forgot about that until Kaepernick came up. But that was Tommy Smith and John Carlos for the United States. But, I always, when I was doing my research, I always wondered, because there was 3 guys on the podium, who was the silver medalist that didn't raise his hand? And it was a kid by the name of Peter Norman out of Australia who wasn't part of that. Getting back to the coach, we talked about coaches. What's a trait of a good coach? What's traits that you're looking for when you're hiring coaches?
Somebody who can make common sense decisions, is good on their feet, but can make a good common sense decision. It's about coaching, it's about safety, it's about communicating with kids and families, but making a common sense decision. I've always said that coaches, part of my job was to help them succeed, but a lot of times I had to help them, prevent them from hurting themselves by making a bad decision. But ones that make good common sense decisions, when they had a chance, the ones who made tough decisions, when they had a chance to think about it, they said, well, would you have changed that? Well, I would have. So making good on-the-fly decisions about kids and why we run programs. Then there's a lot of other things that go into that when you look for a coach. And I've always felt that the most important job that I have, Mike, is hiring good coaches. And I have a picture on my desk that has about somebody, ADs who didn't do their homework. And they, whether it's Little League or high school, and had people who wouldn't have passed a background check because they didn't pay attention.
Sure.
So that's important. So the role modeling, the hard work, the knowledge in their field, but they have to be also good communicators.
You know, coaches, back in the day, coaches did everything. Before there were athletic trainers, coaches did everything. And I remember as a kid and playing youth football on those hot, humid days, they were giving us salt tablets to help us, something that led to dehydration and, you know, vomiting and things that weren't good for you. When did science finally enter into the discussion with sports and athletes?
Well, the other pills you were taking, too, were dextrose. They were a sugar pill.
Okay.
And I remember our high school coach, we'd get on the bus to go to a game, and he'd hand out these white pills. And they said that these are nutrients, that they're going to give you energy. They were sugar pills.
Wow.
So you got the salt tablets that dehydrated you, the dextrose that supposedly gave you energy. So it was a different world back then because we didn't have the knowledge. Once athletes started passing out, once they started dying of head collisions, of sunstroke and heat exhaustion, that's when it got people's attention to say there's got to be a better way of doing this. And then the folks that, and the science folks and the doctors started studying it, starting forming committees and say, wait, we're putting our kids at risk. Then they started saying, now we have to put some common sense principles into training, into what we should be doing. The old thing was wrestling. I remember our wrestlers in high school would wear those rubber suits to melt down.
Lose the weight.
To lose the weight, which
Sure.
was one of the worst things you could do,
Yeah.
but nobody knew better.
Yeah.
No one knew better at that time. So science, thank goodness, has caught up, and it's been good since that point on. But knowledge is power, and without knowledge, you can't get better.
Yeah. Well, and the other relatively new phase in high school sports are athletic trainers. They were big, obviously, in college level, in the pro levels. But describe the job of an athletic trainer.
An athletic trainer is invaluable today, and I've been fortunate at Concord High School, Milton Academy, obviously at the university I was at, both of them. We had full-time athletic trainers,
Yep.
and then we have an outstanding athletic trainer. But they are invaluable because they have the knowledge. They're there with all their capabilities, an AE machine, whatever they need. They also are common sense, that if a coach isn't sure, like the old days, that somebody's head, they've got signs and symptoms of dizziness, of nauseaism. And what do you do? Well, the athletic trainer is going to go in and evaluate that athlete, so they're invaluable. And our mindset now is completely different, that winning was the most important thing, that kids, if you were tough, you could play through injuries, that you could get hit and you could participate. Because of the education, because of now the concussions, because of coaches' education and athletic trainers, we've been able to have a professional make those assessments
Sure.
on the spot. So you, in my estimation, you cannot have activities today without good athletic trainers on a daily basis and then team physicians who are the lifeblood of our programs.
Well, as a kid, and I'm sure you can relate, when we did our youth sports, there was nothing even close to an athletic trainer. I mean, concussions were big. Back in the day, you got your bell rung. You know, the coach's response was, you know, take a blow, rest, and get back in the game. So the concussion protocol, can that be improved, or are we being too strict with that interpretation sometimes?
I don't think we can be too strict with it because it's whenever you err, you want to err on the side of safety. And the people that are in, the specialists that are working on this, and they're working on it every single day, just like a cure for cancer, on how can we get better, how can we detect concussions, the length of them, what can we do to prevent them. So the professionals are doing those things, and we're getting better. But the same old thing, it's knowledge. We have to have our coaches knowledgeable, parents need to be knowledgeable, and I always say it, a perspective. What's important? Is winning a game or playing in that game more important than somebody's safety? And safety is number one. And if we put that behind anything else, then we're not keeping a proper perspective, and winning is more important than what we're really all about, and that's having a good perspective.
So jumping on that, today there's a drop in little kids playing football because the parents don't want their kids to get hurt. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, that's a choice that parents make because of the safety of their kids. But I think if you do it, it's a safe sport. You have to know the liabilities that go into it. But again, it comes down to who's in the arena every single day with the kids. We've got coaches. So the coaches have to have the education. They've got to use good common sense, a trait that I talked about, making good decisions, and then not putting kids in unhealthy situations. Then it comes down to athletic trainers who are visible, who are making sure. We have a great thing that's called Drop the Dummy at Bedford High, where Eric Gelinas will go to practice and drop a dummy and say, all right, treat that athlete who went down. Athletes, treat that coach who just went down.
Sure.
So our kids are in those situations every single season. Then you've got administrators like myself. And if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not holding coaches accountable, if I feel the pressure from parents to say, oh, come on, let us wiggle around that policy, it's important for my kid to play, and I say, well, you're right, we can kind of circumvent that rule, then I'm wrong. So it takes all of us, parents, youth coaches, high school coaches, athletic trainers, and physicians. If we're all working together, we can make it as safe as possible. So if you want to play football, I think you should play football. But that's not my decision. That's a family's decision.
Sure. Yeah, good point. All right, so let's do a little one-word answers. Bob Cameron.
Loyal.
Bill Hagan.
Supportive.
Chip McGee.
Supportive.
Tim Mays.
Unbelievable.
Joe Romano.
Superwoman.
Officials.
Love them.
John Calipari.
The best.
Who was the most influential person in your life in high school?
Besides my parents were number one. They're my role models. Would be my high school coach, Dave Dean, who also taught physical education, was a soccer coach, was the basketball coach, and I wanted to be him. From the 8th grade on, I went to his camps. I played in the summer leagues. I wanted to be Dave Dean. So whatever Dave Dean did, he was my role model. And he did everything the right way. First class, looked like a professional, treated you with class and dignity, made you work hard, believed in you, did things in the summer to help us out, cared about us as individuals. I wanted to be Dave Dean. And every year I would go to my counselor, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and he had the same question. Bill, what do you want to do? I want to be a coach and a teacher. And every year I would tell him the same thing. So I knew at an early age that's what I wanted to do. And that was really important. But it was because of Dave Dean.
Same question, most influential person at UVM?
A fellow by the name of Dr. Zach Clemens, who a letter was read by Zach at my retirement celebration. Zach was a professor at UVM, and when I was an assistant coach, I was working on my master's because it really was important to me for me to get my master's degree. And he was one of the professors in education. I got it in education. And I took his class, and his class, typically a college class would be, for education, you'd have 30 students, and it'd be a small venue. Well, when I signed up for Zach's class as a graduate school, it was a lecture hall. Hundreds of students took his class. And I said, there's got to be a reason, besides people thinking you got an easy grade, there had to be a reason why this class was so popular, and it was because of him. He was a motivator. He was from the old school, Italian, from the old country. His family was raised that way, had values, but he was an unbelievable motivator and put things in perspective, could tell great stories used voices from old women, from young men. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah,
so every time I sat there, I got an education about life. So if I have any speaking skills, it's because of Zach Clemens, who's been a role model, a mentor for 9 years and now forever. As long as I've known him, he's been my buddy.
Yeah.
And it's all about relationships. And he was what I think about at UVM for 9 years, and of course the coaches that I had, but he would be the thing I would think about for 9 years, besides my wife, who I met there.
And we're going to transition into that. Tell us about your family, your wife Jill, who I love. If you're going to Texas, it's without me quote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it tells you a lot about her. Another educator. We met in Burlington, Vermont, when I was an assistant coach at UVM. I ran the first overnight basketball camp at UVM as an assistant. I was in charge of that. And I just knew it inside and out because I had worked camps all over the country, like I'd mentioned earlier. So I run in the camp. It's called the Catamount Cage Camp. And she took her sister to the camp, who was a very talented player, and signing up. And I didn't know her at that point. And so she brought her sister to sign up to register. And I was hands-on everything. So I was sitting at the desk to register because I wanted to shake hands. I wanted to meet everybody. And here comes this young lady and to sign up for camp. And I really thought it was Rachel, her sister. I thought it was her mother. I thought my wife was her mother. So I didn't get off on a good foot in that respect. But I found out that it was her sister and got to know her. But saw her in another place. I shopped because the clothes, I was raised in a family, a mom who was seamstress,
Yeah.
an uncle who was in the business. So you just dressed appropriate. And I remember in high school, I would wear sport coats, would wear wool slacks, cashmere sweaters, and I worked during the summer, and I bought my own clothes. My parents didn't buy them. So looking good was always important to me. So there was a place in Burlington called City News who had fashions from Europe, and that's where I shopped. And Jill, my wife-to-be, worked there at that time. And I went in to buy a pair of Pierre Cardin leather loafers. And this had to be 1978, 79, and those loafers were $125 back then. So she's waiting on me, and she brings out the pair of shoes in my size, and I slip my shoe, and it's soft leather, and I slip my shoe in, my foot in the shoe, and walk around, and the side splits wide open. Now this is a $125 pair of shoes. She's red in the face, she's embarrassed, she runs in the back, gets the owner comes out and apologizes. So that was my other introduction to my wife-to-be. So basketball and clothes, two of my passions. So it was a marriage made in heaven.
Talk to me about your kids, Nick, Aaron, and Natalie, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And your two grandkids, Rex and Stella.
Actually, three now.
Three.
We have Kit, is a son of B and Nick. And I mentioned in my retirement that if there are any heroes in my life, through all the moves, or everything we've done, it's been my kids and my wife. They are the heroes. If I've got any recognition, it was because of them, because their support, their dedication, their just not having me there a lot.
Yeah.
But so when I was there, it was important that we were a family.
Yeah.
But what I love about my kids is that we're proud of them. They gave me something years ago that is the most important thing I have in this office. And it says really, it's what's important to me, what I value. Family's number one. But what I value about what I do in all my interactions with people, it's a plaque, and it's called integrity. And the kids gave me that, and integrity is making the right decision. Wisdom tells you what decision you should make. Integrity tells you what path to take.
Okay.
So I've lived my life by having integrity. And on the bottom is a little plaque that says, to Dad, my three kids, Natalie, Nick, and Aaron, thank you for teaching us your values. So that, to me, was instrumental in what we're all about. So my kids picked up those values from my wife and I. So they are really neat kids, and we're very proud of them. Aaron is the director of admissions at an independent school outside of San Francisco, which basically is a feeding ground for Stanford and Cal.
Nice.
It's a tremendous job. His wife's in the business world in San Fran. We have 2 grandchildren, Rex and Stella. Our daughter Natalie, who went to UNH. Our son Aaron went to Colby, played football at Colby, just had a great career. Natalie went to UNH, is a teacher at the Montessori School in Falmouth, lives in Portland, Maine. And our son Nick, who went to Rhode Island, Boise State, and was coaching at the University of San Francisco, and now coaches and teaches with his wife Bea at New Hampton School. Nice. And has a son, and our grandson Kit. So they're the joy of my life. My wife has been supportive the entire way, and I did tell a story at my retirement about the things that she's done.
The 2 weeks when you went from Littleton to Concord.
To make it work, and that's just one of the things.
Yeah, great story.
Yeah, I mean, we lived at the White Farm in Concord. Part of the agreement was to take the job in Concord was that we had no housing, and because I couldn't sell a house, it was that market that just dipped.
Sure, remember.
And we had bought a brand new house in Littleton, and 3 months earlier, just couldn't move it. So I said to the board and the committee, I said, we need a place to live. And they said, well, we have the perfect place for you and your family. Well, maybe not so perfect for my wife. It was called the White Farm, which is basically Project C, where they have science projects on Clinton Street. And they have birds there, they have habitat, they've got chickens, they've got roosters, they've got all kind of wildlife. And the house was right on the property. And they said, you can live there with your family, but under one condition, is that you take care of the animals. So my wife took care of the animals.
Good story.
So she's done tremendous things for us.
That's great. You know, I asked a couple of high school kids if there was one question you would ask Mr. Whitmore, what would it be? And one stood out. It was, how do you maintain such a great tan in the pale state of New Hampshire?
It's called genetics. I've got that Mediterranean blood.
There you go.
So I can go out in the sun, I can pick up my mail, and I get a suntan.
Nice.
It's not artificial, it's all real, but it's out at being games watching those students.
Yeah, absolutely. Favorite president?
Abraham Lincoln.
Least favorite president?
Well, you're asking tough questions, and you said you would. And I go by integrity. Integrity to me is huge. I don't care whether you're a Republican or Democrat or independent. And he might have been good for our country, but I didn't like his integrity, and that'd be Bill Clinton.
I don't think you're wrong. How do you want to be remembered as a teacher?
That I was a positive role model, that I was consistent, that I wasn't afraid to make the right decision, whether it was popular or unpopular, for the good of that individual and the good of our program or a class. But that to make the right decision, and that's really important to me, and to be a positive role model, and to walk the talk. I can talk about anything, but if I don't emulate that, and I don't model it, and I don't do it on a daily basis, then I'm a hypocrite. And today, you can't be hypocrites if you're a role model. And it's not about verbiage, it's about watching. The best role models are observing.
How do you want to be remembered as a coach?
Fair, demanding, a pusher, making you better.
How do you want to be remembered as a person?
Hard worker, family person, family man. Again, integrity.
If there's one thing you would change in your life, it would be?
Nothing.
Anything you want to add?
I appreciate you doing the interview, Mike. I've been blessed for 42 years to be at 7 neat places. I've got a great family. I mentioned this, that originally I thought when I started my career in '75, and people listening, especially young people, is that it takes years to garner wisdom. gray hair, wrinkles, but I always thought it was about the destination. And it was all really about the journey. And the journey is where you started and the relationships you've built and developed with people over that time. And it's never been about brick and mortar. It's never been about great facilities. It's been about people. And I love people. And the way you treat people, all people. I'm a blue-collar guy, whether it's the workers in the cafeteria, the maintenance folks, the custodians. And I always remind people that if somebody throws a piece of paper on the ground and they don't pick it up, or they don't clean up after themselves. I remember about my mother, working hard, cleaning for the nuns in the convent, cooking for them, that if somebody throws something on, somebody's going to have to pick that up. And that's not their job. That's your job. So you need to learn those lessons. But it's about people and about valuing everyone, whether it's a John Calipari or somebody who works in the cafeteria. Everybody is important. And you treat them with class and dignity and respect. That's how you form relationships. That's how you have people that you care about. But if you're on your own thing and you don't care about people, and you don't take the time to enjoy people and relationships along the way, you're missing, to me, what life is really all about. So it's been about the journey and the people I've met that have made my journey an unbelievable one. And now I'm starting on the next phase of my journey in retirement. And I'm not done. I am not done helping people and enjoying life, and it's all about.
Well, I remember from a personal note, I've been watching you for a number of years on the sidelines and doing a great job here in Bedford by the number of championships that the teams have brought in, and you've been at the helm. But from a personal note, I remember I told you at one time that I had started a pizza shop and I had a pretty good pizza. And you had said, I'll be the judge of that. And now that I know you came from the Jersey Shore and you had probably what I consider the Manhattan style, New York style, thin crust pizza, which I provided, which you tried and then introduced and have been selling it here and at all of your AD meetings. So for me personally, thank you for that vote of confidence, and thank you for everything you've done here in Bedford. And we're going to miss you because you're leaving behind a great legacy, and we're lucky to have you, and we'll know it when you're gone. But
Well,
thanks so much for being here.
I appreciate that, Mike, and it's been a great ride.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nice job.
Thank you.